Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Institution of Agricultural Engineers Annual Conference 2019. And hopefully everybody's here because they want to be at this conference. The title of our conference is a huge remit, if you like, that can big data lead to smarter farming? That's what we're going to try and explore in this conference. In other words, will big data that is promised so much, can that be the new tractor? Can we get a really sea change in agriculture from this concept of big data? And I hope at the end of the conference you'll identify what role agricultural engineers can play in providing some of this data, analysing that data and so on. I just want to say a few opening remarks about what I see this conference should be about, but it's not my conference, it's everybody's conference. So, the question is, are we on the verge of an agricultural revolution? Agriculture has gone through many revolutions in the past. For example, the first people claim was the change, the move from hunter-gatherers to settled farming. So, you can see in this illustration, they've been out to the forest, they've got this rather large stag, hunter-gatherers, and the settled farmers are looking on. I'm not sure whether they're looking on in amazement or envy or whatever. I have to say, I have cited all of the sources of the illustrations that I've used in this presentation, and I'm intrigued by the caption. Ancient hunter-gatherers and farmers made love, not war. I don't think that's going to be the subject of this conference. I think we'd have double the number of people if that had been the subject. But that was what some people say is the first revolution, when we moved from being hunter-gatherers to actually having settled farming. The second revolution, people claim, is when we introduce mechanisation. And again, these illustrations show just that. The top illustration shows us the invention of the tractor, the use of mechanical means, cultivation equipment, ability to cover much larger areas more intensely. The power lines, I think, are representative of the introduction of more energy sources, more power. And I was at an agricultural engineering exhibition a couple of years ago in Wuhan, and I found this fantastic example of cloning. Anybody from John Deere here? Okay, all right. Well, you've got lovely copies of your big green tractors called Johto Deere tractors, sold in China. Very good example of how mechanisation is revolutionising agriculture. So some people claim that that was the second revolution. The third revolution was improvements in crop breeding, basically the green revolution, how we can use genetics, improved crop breeding to increase productivity. And at the end of the day, what we're looking for is this concept of sustainable intensification. Yes, increasing food production to feed the world, but at the same time not incurring environmental damage by increasing production. Can we get that compromise between those two? Increasing production, but without environmental damage. So, again, people have claimed the revolution in crop breeding, the green revolution, would bring us that sustainable intensification. And then the subject of today's conference is, are we on the verge of the fourth revolution? In other words, where data drives agricultural production and processes. Question, is this revolution imminent? Well, first of all, do we think that big data is going to bring a revolution in agriculture? And I think today's conference is going to start asking some of those questions. Are we on the verge of a fourth revolution? And will data bring that revolution? I've shamelessly nicked this diagram from a fantastic paper by Wolfert et al. Called Big Dating. Oh, it's going back to that first slide. No. Sorry. Big Data in Smart Farming, a review. So it's a brilliant paper. I've given you the link there if you want to look at that. But I think this diagram really sums up what we're looking at. Better sensing and monitoring of our agricultural environment. And I use that term deliberately, agricultural environment. Then what are we going to do with all of that big data? There are challenges there in that we've got to have smart analysis and planning. Are we there? Do we have those techniques where we can take all of this data that we're collecting constantly on farm? Do we have the analytical techniques to be able to analyse that and come out with meaningful results? You know, are we there yet? Yes, we can collect the data. Can we analyse that data? But then the so what question, what can we do with that analysis of the data to give better management guidance to those on the ground? So smart control, and of course, if we understand what the outcomes of that smart control, that helps us to, again, have more monitoring and smart sensing. So it's this big circle of learning, which is where we come into machine learning from the outcomes of previous analysis of data. So I think this conference is asking the question, is that revolution imminent? And what are the implications of big data for future farming and land-based industries? I looked again, I've done my homework for this, I have done my homework, I looked at what is the definition of big data. And I came across this fantastic definition, which I think really applies to agricultural data. It's data that's too large, messy, yes, rapid and diverse. It's too large, messy, rapid and diverse to handle with traditional relational database management systems and statistical software programs. That's the challenge that we have in agriculture of how we can use this big data to good effect. I also think it's useful that we're going to be covering some of what I've called, no, I haven't called, Wolfert et al. Have called the push and pull factors that drive the development of big data and smart farming. This is not new, by the way, but there are some significant developments that have led to an advancement in big data. Let me just read out the main things. These are what Wolfert calls the push factors that are pushing big data and developments in big data. Things like technological improvements, more sophisticated technologies, things like GPS, satellite imaging, robots, we're going to hear a lot about that, UAVs, unmanned aerial vehicles. These new technologies are able to develop and generate much more data, and we've got the capacity to store that data better than ever before. We've got better connectivity digitally, so we hear about the Internet of Things where everything is connected and so on. And I like this one in particular. I think this is the drive, this is the push. It's the innovation possibilities. You know, what are the applications? Let's not just come up with a technology that's in search of an application. Let's look at an application of where this big data can be used. And the bottom one, I'm really interested in online farm shops. How does the commercial, the retail sector use some of this big data to improve their service to customers? And that's going to engage with the public. You know, that's really going to, if you go to your farm shop and it's really efficient in terms of that experience of going to the farm shop because of digital and big data advances, that's going to resonate with the public. And then there's also the pull factors. Okay, those are the push factors of why big data has got more traction, if you like, within agriculture. And then the pull factors, things like business drivers. You know, efficiency to increase lower cost prices, food prices are very much to the fore. The political situation is very uncertain, so can we bring some more certainty as far as pricing is concerned? Things like to cope with more legislation and paperwork, can big data play a role there? And again, to deal with the volatility in weather conditions. So even the spectre of climate change is related to big data. Can big data help us to cope with that volatility in weather conditions, for example, caused by climate change? And then we've got public drivers. People are interested in food, nutritional security, food safety. What role does big data have in improving food safety? There have been enough scares. Could those scares have been prevented if we had had better big data systems? And of course, the trendy buzzword of sustainability and how we reconcile that with short-term economic gain that many businesses want. And then there's a final point that this general need for more and better information, well, that's not new. That's always been the case. And I want to bring your attention to, again, by the way, I don't work for John Deere, but I've mentioned them twice already, but given that there's no one in the room, but I just wanted to raise, I'm going to be very balanced here. There's a video on YouTube about what the farm of the future looks like, where big data is being applied. And I'd like you to watch that video. I've given you the link again. I'd like you to watch that video and ask yourself the question whether you think that is an optimistic or pessimistic view of the future. Okay, right, I'm going to shut up very soon. I just want to give you a little bit of a flavour of today's programme. Ultimately, I think what we are after with big data is, can we use big data to achieve this concept of sustainable intensification? It's a bit old hat now, and I'm sure many of you have got money running on how many times has Jane mentioned sustainable intensification. I've just done it again, so you've made another £1. You're welcome. But here we're trying to maximise production without harming the environment. That's all there is to it. Increasing food production to feed the world, and biofuels and fibre and fodder and so on, but without harming the environment. Can big data help us deliver that? Because we as agricultural engineers, that, I guess, is ultimately our aim. We will hear speakers that represent throughout the supply chain, from field, soil management practices, right through to fork, in terms of how retailers are currently using big data for improved post-harvest storage within shops and so on. So we'll see the whole of the supply chain. We'll hear from everybody from very small companies through SMEs right up to multinational corporations who are using this big data. So we get a good range of company sizes. We'll look at how this big data technology transfer and exchange, how, for example, other sectors are using big data and how the agriculture sector can learn from them. We'll hear about developments in technologies, hardware, software, and in applications. And again, I want to ask the question, well, who benefits from all of this big data? Is it just the big multinationals that are going to benefit? Why is Microsoft and Google getting interested in agriculture, for example? Why would that be? Who's benefiting from this, and who pays for the technologies that we need to deliver this? Is it private goods that will just go to companies, or is it public goods that will benefit the whole of society? And then the question is, well, who should then invest? So I've got 3 questions. Are we there yet? Do we have these technologies currently? If we don't, how are we going to get there? And then thirdly, do we want to get there? And again, that's quite a controversial question as to, do we think that we want to get there? Is this going to deliver what we're after in terms of sustainable intensification?